So, season 1 just happened. That was something. By something, I mean holy fucking shit. To recap what I'm... Yeah, that's hot. To recap what I'm pretty sure I already know and what I'm expecting. Jonathan's lost his mind. The workload plus the fact that he's dealing with crazy shit all the time has finally gotten to good boy Jonathan Sims, and he is low-key on the descent to madness. Sasha is not Sasha. No one can tell me otherwise. Something changed, and I don't fucking like it. Martin is traumatized. Tim is traumatized. And Elias is something. And they found Gertrude surrounded by cassette tapes, which I find odd because it's like, oh, were you also making cassette tapes? Interesting. 2 cassettes have been stolen. One where Sasha met Michael, and one with the creepy clowns dolls that were ripping off people's jaws just because, I don't know. I guess that's just what creepy clown dolls do. You know, I'm not going to judge him. And no one is happy. So, you know, everything's going great. So now, the fuck was that? Was that phone? Hang on. No. How odd. Anyway. Now, it does have a Q&A and then a trailer, but I'm going to skip the trailer for definite because I don't like spoilers. And the Q&A, I don't think I need to listen to. Maybe I'll listen to it another time. I don't know. I'm glad that the internet also ships Jonathan and Martin. I know that Jonathan actively hates Martin, but I still listen. I can't explain it, but they just... I don't care what the outcome is, okay? Those boys were meant for each other because you've got soft boy Martin who just wants to please people, and you've got like Jonathan on the side being like, I am this close to losing my shit, and the minute I lose my shit, someone's gonna fucking die. And Martin's next to him like, darling, when did you last eat? Anyway, so now we're on to technically episode 41. Too deep. I really hope that's not a euphemism because I really don't think I can deal with that today. I have elected to just not do work until the evening, and then I'm just going to do work then because apparently my brain fucking hates me. I would love to be able to do work, but unfortunately, I don't think it's in the cards. So, you know, that's absolutely fine. You know, totally fine. Not a problem. Oh, yeah, don't ignore that. It's actually, and I have another one next to it. Things show up at random places in my house, and it just works because I have ADHD, and it's like, oh, shit, yeah, I need to do that. So I have like a deodorant can in every single room so that I always remember to put it on. It's a stupid thing, but it works. Except the living room deodorant can is empty. So, but it still reminds me. So it's doing its job. So it sits there. So even though it's empty, nothing in it, it being there reminds me like to go, oh, have you put deodorant on? And I go, yes, or I go, no, and then I go and put on deodorant. Anyway, you don't need to know my hygiene routine. You need to listen to this.
Hey there, sentimental garbage fans. It's Caroline.
Who?
Episode 41. Too deep.
I wonder if the intro ever gets quieter. Something tells me it doesn't. I'm very nervous.
Statement of Jonathan Sims.
I can just hear
Head
it in his
archivist
voice.
of the Magnus Institute regarding exploration of the tunnels recently discovered below the archive.
Sir, why are you in the tunnels?
Statement given direct. 2nd September 2016.
Jonathan, get the fuck out of the tunnels! What? Jonathan! Jonathan, please. Please go to bed, Jonathan. I need to check. Okay, so it's saying that it's the 2nd of September. The actual episode came out on the 1st of December, so it's not time relative like that. I'm gonna real quick because I just want to see something. Just want to see something because if I'm correct about what I'm thinking, I have a very funny. I'm gonna chuckle, bro.
AI might be.
Let's see.
Just pain. The paramedics.
I guess. Okay, so it's been 2 months. I wanted to see if he went down into the tunnels the same day. I was gonna be like, Jonathan, please take a fucking nap. But no, it's actually been like 2 months, so it's fine. I apologize for the delay.
Statement begins. I've been going into the tunnels. Jane Prentice is dead.
Oh my god, he's actually lost it.
I have a small jar on my desk of what are supposed to be her ashes. I don't believe it for a second. I think Martin just gave me a jar of dust to try and calm me down. Give me something to focus on for closure.
Oh god. Martin, I love you. I can actually see him going, does anyone have a fireplace? Being like going to like the entire cohort, being like, does anyone have a fireplace? They're like, what? It's like, answer the fucking question. Do you have a fireplace? Yes. Can I have some of your ashes? What? Can I have some of the ashes from your fireplace? Why? Does not concern you. Answer the question. And then just goes with a little mason jar and it's like, perfect. Gives it to Jonathan. Here you go. I got your ashes for you. That is something Jonathan would do, if we're being honest. Like, Jonathan is just that fucking cute. Like, that desperate to try and like soothe. Also, I like that Martin is it feels like Martin has become his emotional support human.
I hate to say it, but it does appear to be working. A victory for the placebo effect, it would seem. But that's beside the point. The worms have been cleared and incinerated, the floors and walls repaired, and the archive looks remarkably like it was never attacked at all.
That's a good thing.
Unlike me.
Oh.
I I've healed enough in the last month to return to work, but I'm told it's unlikely the scars will ever truly fade. Tim is still signed off. Truth be told, I could have stayed away longer. Probably should have, but I don't think the boredom was good for me.
Oh, I can imagine
I tried
that.
to come back earlier, but Martin wouldn't hear of it. Almost threw me out of the archive. Is he hiding something?
Oh,
No, of course not. He's probably just legitimately concerned for my health. Why do I still feel like I'm being watched? I'd just about convinced myself it was Prentice, watching me in secret while she filled the walls with her writhing hordes. But no. She is dead and gone, and still, whenever I talk into this damn thing, I feel this. I'm being watched. I know I am.
he's
I think
actually
it was
lost
some
it.
aspect of the recorder itself, but it still happens even when I'm just reading these files. Not as strongly as when I'm recording them, perhaps, but still there.
Jonathan has lost it.
You know, I always despised those witnesses who rambled on, unable to stay on topic, couldn't give a concise statement. Yet here I am, mumbling my vague suspicions of being watched and completely ignoring the reason I'm making a statement of my own. I have been exploring the tunnels.
You did tell us that.
It's been a couple of weeks now,
Okay.
from before I was officially back. If you listen to this, Martin, I'm sorry. I've gone behind your back to explore the tunnels on several occasions. I took the key from Elias's desk some time ago. I don't think he noticed.
That's so
Since
funny.
Martin stopped living in the archives, I've had ample opportunities for exploration by night. Part of me still wonders if going down there after dark was more dangerous, but the pitch black of those tunnels will be no different in the daytime.
Oh, good point.
The only light down there is what you bring yourself.
Okay.
The first time I attempted to explore them, I had no idea. I brought one torch, and that was it. The lights in the archive were off when I arrived at the Institute. I hadn't been down here since it was full of worm carcasses. I'd never explored down here by torchlight, and the shadows were starker than I had anticipated.
Jonathan
Every time I
is not
walked between
okay.
the shelves, I swear I would see movement out of the corner of my eye.
Oh God, Jonathan, you need help.
When I turned, there was nothing. Obviously, there was nothing. Then I came to the trapdoor. If Sasha hadn't thought to clearly mark it with hazard tape, I'm not sure I would ever have found it again. But there it was. It took several minutes of fumbling before I was able to figure out how to lift the concealed handle and expose the lock, but I managed it. The key turned with a click that I found oddly satisfying, and I pulled it open. When I had thought about that moment before, I had always imagined it groaning open with a tortured, ominous creep.
I like that he had to tell us he found it
But
oddly
it was
satisfying.
almost silent. It glided open as though on freshly oiled hinges,
Probably are
with only
freshly
the
oiled.
faintest puff of stagnant air being released from beneath it. The opening was utterly black, with the faintest hint of decay in the cold, clammy air that rushed out of it. The stairs down it were steep, far steeper than I remembered them from when I had first climbed out.
They always
But
feel like
those
that.
memories are unreliable.
I mean, you were high on
and tinged
CO2,
with other, more potent experiences.
like CO2 and worms.
I turned the torch on and was pleased by how easily it penetrated the darkness, illuminating the rough grey stone below. I was expecting my torch to be met by hundreds of decaying worm husks, but the passage seemed to be empty. I headed down into the
That's
tunnel,
nice.
closing the trapdoor behind me. It is hard to put into words how it felt to be down there in the cool, mouldering air of the tunnels. Have you ever left a crowded room and literally felt the silence as you walked out into the night?
Yep.
It was something like that. A sudden, quiet absence. Not in itself a fearful thing, but unsettling. In a way I hadn't noticed through the fear and adrenaline of my first time in the tunnels. I took a moment to examine the feeling, but couldn't trace it to anything obvious, so I began to explore. It was almost unreal how quickly I became lost. I generally consider myself to have an excellent sense of direction, but within minutes I became unsure.
Is there anything
exactly
about
which
you don't
passages
think
I
is
had come
perfect,
from.
Jonathan?
I didn't even have the excuse of the corridors all looking the same, as they varied significantly in height and construction.
Mm.
Some were built of sturdy brick. Some seemed almost as though they had formed naturally, though in all cases it was the same dull, grey stone.
Mm.
To call it a maze wouldn't quite be accurate, as a maze is designed. It is set out with an obvious goal, even if that goal is to confuse and disorientate.
That's fair.
This place, it felt, was more organic in its unpredictability, as though it had been intended to be used, to be travelled, but had gotten twisted somehow.
Mm.
I found spaces that seemed intended as rooms, but without doors. Elsewhere there were doors that seemed simply attached to the walls. Most of these were firmly shut, though some opened to reveal the flat grey stone behind.
That's so stupid.
Only a handful I opened had actual rooms behind them, and in every case I found myself wondering whether that was where Martin had found her.
Oh.
There was no way to tell. Even when the police finally found Gertrude's body, they took it, chair and all, as well as all the tapes. Evidence, they said. And they might be right, though I don't envy them the task of going through all of them. There must have been hundreds. No, I suppose in some way I do envy them. They are an insight into my predecessor's time here, something I desperately want to know more about.
I can
Whatever's
tell.
on them, it must be important, because either she chose to hide them down here, or whoever killed her did. Either way, I have a feeling it isn't something the police are going to understand. I half hoped to stumble across a lone cassette lying in one of the corridors, dropped and overlooked, but there was nothing. Just dark and empty tunnels.
Feels bad, man.
Silent and unwelcoming. I foolishly didn't think to make a note of the time I entered the tunnels, so it was hard to say how long I had been down there, or how far I had gone when I found the first of the worms.
You're not helping
But it
with your
can't have been
sound
more than
mind,
half
are you,
hour.
mate?
They were long dead by then, shriveled, stringy things like discarded sausage casing.
Ah!
It was odd to see how clear a line there was between the wormless tunnels and those where they lay rotting. A clear
Oh,
line
God.
beyond which the cleaning crews had decided not to advance.
Yeah, they were
When
like,
I
nah.
crossed that line, I
fuck
half
that.
expected the corpses to spring to life, turning their squirming heads towards me
Surprise,
with a
bitch.
predatory lunge. But they were still.
I'd fucking hope so, mate.
Nonetheless, I went slower through those deeper passages, picking my footing carefully so as not to touch them.
Martin's
The air
just
was
at the
cold
entrance
here,
like,
suffused
John,
with the tang of rot.
are you hiding
I
again?
began to wonder how much battery I had in my torch. I had put a fresh one in before my expedition. I'm not stupid. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I don't actually know how long batteries last in continuous use in a heavy-duty torch. I hadn't even been down there an hour, but already it felt like the light had cast.
How do you know you hadn't been down there an hour? You just said you
And
weren't.
I realized how unsure I was of my exact route back.
Oh my God.
I decided I would rather cut my first trip unnecessarily short than risk being trapped down there without light. So I turned back.
He's lost
It was
it.
almost impossible to retrace my steps. I
Mhm.
tried to remember my route using what vague oddities I could remember as landmarks: a burned door, a particularly warped corridor, and door,
Sorry, my alarm
particularly
went off.
warped corridor. But trying to find them again was useless in the winding passages. In my increasing panic to find the way out, I almost forgot the things I had originally gone down there to look for. Then I found the circle of worms.
Oh.
When Tim had first described it, I had only half believed him.
What did I just walk
I'm
back in?
sorry, Tim, if you're listening, but the CO2 had done some strange things to you at that point. He had the right of it, though. By the time I found it, there was little left but a thick carpet of dead worms, but a few were still embedded in the wall, providing the clear outline of a circle. The ceiling was higher here, and all told it must have been about 10 feet in diameter. Its size was not the most disconcerting thing, though. Inside the circle, the stone was wrong, somehow.
What?
Solid but oddly wavy, like chocolate that's melted and then rehardened. It took me a minute or two to work up the courage to wade through that shallow sea of filth, but I did. And when I touched the warped wall, it felt soft and porous, but stable.
I don't like that.
I turned and left, but not before noting that another path also appeared to have been pushed through the worms on the floor. Though when it happened or who had made it, I couldn't say. It took me almost another hour to find the trapdoor again. My torch showed no signs of giving up, but I was still on the verge of panic. My hands were so slick with sweat that I fumbled several times with
Mate,
the handle.
you're feeding these fears so much, and it's your own
falling
fault.
through it onto the floor of the archives.
Sorry, I missed that
It was
entire
about 3 in the
description.
morning.
Please let me know again.
It took me almost another hour to find the trapdoor again. My torch showed no signs of giving up, but I was still on the verge of panic.
Mm-hmm.
My hands were so slick with sweat that I fumbled several times with the handle before finally pushing it open bodily and falling through it onto the floor of the archives.
Martin's just waiting up
It was
there like,
about 3 in the morning by that time.
what?
I had managed to open a few of my partially healed wounds, so I headed home to rest.
Please, yeah.
It turned out the trip had taken far more out of me than I had thought. It was almost a week before I felt like I might be up for another excursion. This time, however, I decided I was not going to take any chances. I packed 3 torches with enough replacement batteries to last for days, food and water in case I was down there longer than expected, a box of white chalk to clearly mark my way, and the largest knife I was able to buy at short notice. The first time down there, I had, on more than one occasion, been almost certain that I could hear sounds of movement from further into the tunnels.
Don't like that.
At the time, I had convinced myself it was simply a combination of echo and my mind playing on my fears, but on the chance there was something down there. Well, I had my doubts how effective a knife would be, but it certainly eased my mind. Beyond that, I made sure to take one of the smaller CO2 fire extinguishers from the archives. I was
Valid.
determined that any surviving worms would not be so for long. Again, I waited until nightfall before letting myself into the archives and heading down into the tunnels below. Almost as soon as I got down there, I started marking the walls and intersections with white chalk arrows. They pointed the direction I'd come from, the direction I'd need to follow when I wanted to leave. If there was anything down there and I had to flee, then I reasoned all I would need to do was follow the chalk arrows back to the entrance.
That's fair.
For a while, this worked. Once or twice, I discovered I had inadvertently made a loop or gotten turned around and was facing one of my earlier arrows, but it was a relatively simple matter to correct it. I also set up my watch, so I had a clear idea of how long I had been down there. After a half hour, I'd gotten far deeper than I had in my entire first expedition and gotten past the empty area into the tunnels still lined with dead worms.
Lovely.
And then beyond them, to those tunnels wholly empty and, apparently, undisturbed since the days of Millbank Prison.
Millbank
I
Prison.
had done what research I could on Millbank. First proposed and designed in 1799 by Jeremy Bentham, a philosopher who wished to test his theories of the panopticon prison, where cells would be arranged in a circle around a single central guard tower, so all cells were observable at once.
That's
It was
not
to
my
have
mission.
6 such areas, arranged in hexagons, giving it from the air the shape of a vast, angular flower. It's not clear why that original plan was abandoned, but from 1812 onwards, a succession of other architects were brought in to try and finish the project. Finally, 3 years later, they brought in Robert Smirke. He saw the project to completion in 1821 with a design remarkably similar to Bentham's original. However, whereas Bentham's would have been geometric and easy to navigate, Millbank Penitentiary as it was built was more often described as an eccentric maze, twisting corridors, doors at strange angles and narrow passages so poorly lit inmates would need to feel their way along. Throughout much of the 19th century was where prisoners were kept before transportation to Australia, and the brutality of the jailers was said to be second to none.
Jesus.
Its position on what was then marshlands hardly helped, with sickness and disease rife within their walls.
Lovely.
It was a huge complex, covering much of what we now call Chelsea, and when it was finally closed in 1890, it was demolished, flattened, which meant that what I was in now couldn't be the old prison itself. It had to be something built below it.
That's not weird at
It
all.
was this that gave me such pause when I found the first set of steps, leading even further down. They were stone, spiraling into the darkness at an angle so steep it made my legs weaken slightly. The steps led higher as well, but after a few meters disappeared into the solid stone of the ceiling. I made a note of their location and carried on, keen to explore as much of the first level as possible before going any deeper. It was becoming very apparent that these tunnels must have covered the entire area of Millbank, or even further, and there was every possibility that they continued for miles. I had seen little down there of note thus far, something I will admit gave me a pang of both disappointment and relief, and took a short break to drink some water and compose myself.
Good idea.
It was shortly after this I found the next staircase. It was identical to the first in material, and construction, and look. It was the same in all but one detail. The large chalk arrow pointing downwards. I'm sure I don't need to say that I had not drawn it. My own arrows were jagged, workmanlike things. This was curled and neat, pointing the way with a flourish. That was when I heard the noises again. They could have been footsteps, I suppose, but if so, they were soft, quiet. Was someone running around those tunnels barefoot? I froze in place and listened, but the noises did not return, and I gripped my knife. I am not a brave man. I believe I'm starting to come to terms with that fact. But I am, in certain circumstances, a very stubborn one.
Damn right.
There was something inside me that made the decision that I would rather die at the hands of some tunnel-dwelling beast than work above without knowing what it was. Maybe I'd be lucky and find a crazed, gun-wielding madman a convenient killer for Gertrude.
That would be
I
useful.
almost hear my assistants chiding me for not turning tail and running there and then, but it's hard to fully explain the borderline mania that gripped me when I saw that arrow, mocking and inviting.
Oh, it's. Oh, I can believe
I was
it,
not
babe.
so foolish as to run down the stairs, but I descended them quicker than was safe. Down and down and down they went, each rotation revealing more tunnels and doors, but I saw no sign of reaching the bottom. I had gone down about 4 levels when my torch caught what I thought was movement in the corridors beyond. I left the stairs in pursuit, but was unable to find any sign of life.
Oh my god, mate.
Or death.
Have you been talking? I don't
Only
think.
an empty wine bottle. The label all but rotted away, but the year was still legible as 2003. The passages here were more pronounced in their difference than the ones further up, some being so irregular and seamless as to almost seem organic, while others were almost unnervingly square and regular, with sharp angles and precisely laid bricks. It was in one of these that it happened. I had continued to mark my route with chalk and was scratching an arrow into a particularly flat wall. When I looked up to see the turning ahead of me was no longer there. Instead, there was simply a dead end.
What?
I could find no sign that there had been any movement, nor had I heard anything. I turned back and immediately noticed that the wall opposite me was closer than it had been before. I took a step back in shock and my feet hit the wall behind me. The passage was getting narrower, though I could not see any movement.
That is horrid.
I stood completely still, and for several seconds, there was silence. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, I heard a single word, clear as day. Leave. It was spoken simply, without intonation or threat. Just a command. So I did. I began to shuffle back as quickly as possible the way I had come, keeping my eyes open as long as I could, As every time I closed them, the walls seemed to get even closer. By the time I reached the stairs back up, it had almost pinned me. I fled back up the stairs, followed the arrows I had left back to the trapdoor. It took me barely 10 minutes, but I was moving faster than I would have thought possible in those cramped tunnels. I locked the trapdoor behind me and placed the heaviest objects I could find on it. I have not been below the Institute since then. It took no small amount of consideration to decide I should officially make a statement. I did not think to bring the tape recorder with me. I suppose I've gotten out of the habit during my recuperation. I am no closer to determining what is lurking down there than I was when I started. If anything, I have more questions. Why point me downwards only to then demand I run back?
That is odd,
Is it
actually.
some sort of trap? A test? I don't know. But right now, finding whatever secrets might be lurking in those tunnels is my primary concern.
Mm-hmm.
End recording.
Jonathan's lost it.
Supplemental. I don't care about the tunnels, or the secrets they might hide. That's not strictly true, I suppose. I do have a burning curiosity as to what is down there, but my primary focus must be on who killed Gertrude Robinson, and I do not believe for a moment that it was a wall-moving spectre from the depths of the earth. No, far more likely it's one of my colleagues. Elias is a prime suspect, but it could have been any of them. I've told Martin the second tape recorder was lost in the attack. Having two means I can make two tapes from each recording, one containing the main statement and notes, which will be stored in the archive, and the other containing the statement, notes, and this supplement, which will chronicle my own investigations. These tapes will be hidden. If you're hearing this, I assume you're my replacement following my death or disappearance, and have received instructions on where to find them. I have little more to add to this initial account, as I have only recently returned to my position in full and haven't had time to begin personal investigations. My statement was, of course, completely true, though I have deliberately overstated my interest in the tunnels. My colleagues believe that to be my main focus. They may let their guard down. This level of paranoia is new to me.
Yeah.
But I'm learning fast. Trust can get you killed. End supplement.
What the fuck was that? Holy shit! Sorry, I'm making plans with my friends about working. My hands are very sticky as well. Listen. Can you hear them? The girls are fighting. They're trying to figure out how to motivate me. I respond well to rewards and Is she at the library? I was excited for a late live session, honestly. Yeah, apologies for the fact that I'm now. We're planning a late night library session because I'm pretty sure our libraries are open 24 hours. At least areas of them are, like the main bit. I think the more private rooms are not for like security reasons. But I'm pretty sure the main area is. Okay. I'm gonna quickly wash my hands. So Jonathan's lost his fucking mind, and for some reason is accusing everyone that he works with of murder, because that's normal and definitely the signs of a sound individual. When I think mentally stable, I think assuming your friends are criminals. Yeah, that he is not okay. I now understand why all the fan art I've seen have like give everyone like these weird like sections of like holes on their face, like white scars of like dots. I was like, why have you given them all like? Because when I see dots like that, I always think like old people, because you know old people have like those, you know what I mean? Like they just have those like areas, don't they? There's areas where the skin is kind of just mottly a bit. I don't really know how to describe it, but you know what I mean. Where the pigment's gone all funky. And so I was like, why is everyone giving them these age spots? Like these age skin patches that I don't understand. And then I realized, oh, they're worm scars, which is not horrifying at all. Oh shit, my Coke's run out. All right, I'm gonna set the thing to start, and I'm gonna fill up my fridge with Coke. So this is the Coke. Oh god, it's really not that bad though. Oh, look at me, I'm so strong. I wonder how much this weighs actually, because it's pretty heavy, and it's 24 cans, I think. 24 cans. Each one is 330 milliliters. So I like the fact that he's making these supplements. He's like, no, but they're gonna listen, they're gonna watch. So I made them think I'm really interested in the tunnels. I don't give a fuck about the tunnels. I don't care. I'm gonna find out who murdered Gertrude. I'm gonna avenge you, Gertrude. I think it was Martin. And oh my god, when it went supplement begins, I went, excuse me, what the fuck is this? Absolutely fucking brilliant. Amazing. This is beginning to hurt my hand. Okay, Grifter's Bone is the next one.
AI might be the most important innovation ever.
All right, please show me the transcript. Thank you.
The Magnus Archives.
You can still see me, so it's fine. Dramatic violin.
Episode 42. Grifter's Bone.
Statement of Jennifer Ling regarding a live musical performance she attended in Soho. Original statement given November 3rd, 2013. Audio recording by Jonathan Sims, head archivist.
Head archivist! Don't you fucking forget it!
Statement begins. Anyone who's written about music long enough has at least heard of Grifter's Bone. An urban legend, I guess you could call it. Not quite a ghost story, not quite a joke, not quite a real thing. Sometimes they're a band, sometimes it's just the one guy. If the story has them as a band, then the only one whose name the old-timer knows, because it's always the old-timers telling these stories, is a guy named Alfred Grifter. Some will swear blind it's his real name, others will just give you a knowing look and ask if it sounds real. Fact is, no one knows a damn thing about him except the name he goes by, so it's all just story and gossip. But there's still plenty to go around. Story goes of a mediocre musician with a hunger for more who turns to the dark arts, usually devil worship or witchcraft, but gets it wrong. I've heard it told as a curse, a badly worded wish, or even a devil that just gets mad at being summoned and beats him till his hands don't work. The end is always the same, though. His music is so grating, so gut-churningly awful that he, or sometimes his band, have to sneak into gigs to play unannounced to any audience they can find. And the music is dreadful, a grim cacophony of discord and noise, too much to bear. You can always tell when Grifter's Bone has been on, they'll tell you, because of all the torn-off ears.
Ew.
They're not entirely wrong.
Huh?
I've been writing for Earful for a while. Used to be just me firing my music thoughts onto a blog, but a few years back, my then friend, now boss, Tommy Moncrief, said he was starting up a music site and would I write for it? I said of course I would, and now here I am running video content for it. Earful.com's only been around 3 years or so, but to be honest, in the world of music sites, that gives us a pretty decent pedigree. Tommy's from the old school, used to write for dozens of music magazines back in the Dead Tree days, before print became an embarrassing older relative that just wouldn't die. The point is, he knew a lot of older contacts and writers, most of which he brought on board for Earful. That means I was quickly brought up to speed on decades worth of London music scene gossip by middle-aged white men who only ever wore t-shirts for bands that ended tragically.
Jonathan really gets into like the characters, doesn't he? Because that's the thing. I have to literally remind myself that this is a guy. It's just the same guy doing each one, and obviously I get that the whole reason he's as an actor, the reason he's saying it in different ways is to make it interesting. I get that, but if you think of it like within the universe itself, within the actual universe of the Magnus archives, you fully have this really stern, like posh sounding archivist who gets really into these characters. Like he reads their name and like what the general, and he's like, right, they probably have this accent, they probably talk like this, and then he like emulates them. And I think it's really funny because I'm like oh, I don't know. I just find it really amusing. It's like when it was the criminal one, it was like, first of all, this is not a confession. I was like, Jonathan, you're getting way too into this, buddy. Chill out. It's okay. I got melon hair in my... I've got mango hair in my teeth. I'm thinking we move to the floor so I can do my crafts. Hello. Which means you're gonna go there. Can you still see me? Can you see me? Yeah, you can see me. That's fine.
And that's when I started to hear about Grifter's Bone. Whenever someone was listening to some subpar submission or even just some music of their own that wasn't well regarded, one of the old-timers, usually Mike Baker, would shout over, "I see you got the new Grifter's Bone album," or "I didn't know Grifter's Bone reformed," or something like that. It was annoying as hell, but I never really brought it up. And after hearing every possible variation of the story from a half-dozen drunken writers at our Christmas do, I just kind of decided to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think much more about it until earlier this year. There's a guy who works for Earful by the name of Lee Kipple. His official title is Submissions Editor, though we call it something a little more vulgar. And it's his job to listen through all the music we're sent unsolicited. CDs, MP3s. Recently there's even been a weird fad for sending in music on novelty USB drives. He listens to all of it. As you can imagine, most of it's awful. Still, he is pretty much the nicest guy I've ever met, and I don't think I've ever once heard him complain. He's tall, a bit lanky, with long blonde hair that covers his ears, and his eyes if he's not careful. Because of his job, Lee obviously gets a lot of comments about listening to crappy music. And if it's one of the older folk, you can bet they'll mention Grifter's Bone. It took me a while to notice how weird his reaction was when this happened. Whereas most of the staff would fake laugh, sigh, or maybe swear a little, Lee would go very still. He'd nod gently and reach up to scratch his ears, still mostly covered by hair. No one seemed to notice.
Oh,
I
shit.
kept watching him, and the pattern repeated whenever the band was mentioned. I don't know when I decided that he must have seen Grifter's Bone perform live, but I did. And more than that, I decided he must have fake ears, having torn his own off when he saw the show, and that's why he wore his hair so long to cover them. I didn't really believe it, obviously. It was just a fun little theory I liked to play around with. But the more
Honestly,
I
you're
watched
probably
Lee,
right.
the more it seemed that he did deliberately try to keep his ears covered. Finally, about a month ago, I decided to just ask him. We'd all gone out for drinks, and I'll admit I may have had a few more vodka tonics than would have been wise, but when the others had headed home and it was just Lee left, I decided now was the time. I asked him if they were as bad as everyone said. He looked puzzled, and I leaned in closer. Grifter's Bone, I said. He froze, completely still. I waited for him to touch his ears, but instead he just stared at me, unmoving. He began to stutter something about not knowing what I was talking about, but I cut him off. It was written all over his panicked face. He had seen them. I watched as he decided whether or not to try and run. There was a moment I was sure he was going to literally bolt for the door, but instead he sighed and nodded his head. It was 4 years ago, he told me, at the Good Ship in Kilburn. Lee had been watching an up-and-coming metal band whose name he could no longer recall. They'd been fine, a bit disappointing, so he was in a mood to finish his drink and leave. The rest of the audience seemed to be of a similar mind, so nobody noticed when a man climbed onto the stage and set up a small keyboard. The man was short, so Lee said, and painfully thin, wearing a ratty old brown suit that draped around him like, in Lee's words, flaps of ill-fitting skin.
Ew.
His thinning black hair was slicked back, and his face had a strange look of cruelty to it.
Wait, hang
He
on.
placed his fingers on his instrument.
Wait a fucking minute. Where the hell have I heard ill-fitting skin before? Michael? Michael! Was it Michael? Maybe. I don't fucking know. Anyway, that particular phrasing sounds really familiar.
They left behind dark red spots on the bright white keys. Lee said he had never heard of Grifter's Bone before that moment, but somehow he knew that's what he was looking at. And then the music started. After he said this, Lee went very quiet. It was clear he was concentrating very hard. I waited, not wanting to interrupt, but in the end he just shook his head. He couldn't remember the music, he said. He'd tried, but it was just blank. He'd come back to himself, wandering the streets of Kilburn almost 2 hours later, his shirt soaked in blood, mostly his blood. At this, Lee unbuttoned his shirt and showed me a series of vivid scars slashed onto his chest. The hospital had said it was likely a box cutter of some sort, but he had no memory of it. By then it looked like he was on the verge of tears, but I couldn't leave it alone. I asked about his ears. He actually laughed at this and said no, he hadn't torn them off. Reaching up, Lee pulled back his long blonde hair to reveal an ear that, at first glance, appeared normal, Looking closer, though, I saw that he was wearing earplugs, flesh-covered so as not to be obvious, and caked around the edges of them was a ring of dried blood. He said it was the only way he'd found to stop it dripping down and ruining his shirts. I was a bit freaked out at this, understandably, I think, though it was entirely my own fault, and I'd told him he needed to see a doctor if his ears wouldn't stop bleeding. He just shook his head, said he'd seen enough doctors to know they couldn't help, and that he had learned to cope with it. We drank the rest of the night in silence before heading our separate ways. I know I should have left it alone after that, and I certainly didn't bother Lee again. But I found I just couldn't let it go. Either Lee was mad, or Grifter's bone was real. I started doing research online. There were a few sites that referenced it as an urban legend. There was a punk duo in Oregon who proudly announced that they had named themselves Grifter's Bone after what they described as Britain's musical Jack the Ripper. There were a lot of posts on music forums from newbies to the scene asking what Grifter's Bone was, but nowhere had anything even remotely like Lee's story. Finally, having kind of run out of steam, I threw my findings together into a short feature article and sent it to Tommy, who dutifully approved it. I figured I'd wasted enough time on the subject that I could at least put it towards something decent for the site. It did all right, though it wasn't enough of a hit to justify the time spent on it. Lee didn't mention it when we next talked. I had asked if I could write up his experience after thoroughly anonymizing it, and he shrugged and said fine. All in all, it felt like whatever it was that had hooked me, it was over.
Well, that's good.
And I wasn't too broken up about it.
That's good.
Then someone left a comment on my article.
Oh no.
It just read, "Tonight, Soho." I wouldn't have paid it any attention if it hadn't been for the second line. No earplugs required. These earplugs and the reason behind them had been the only thing he requested I leave out of the article. I mentioned it to Tommy and he just said something about time wasters and how I had better things to do than spend an evening wandering around Soho, randomly walking into music venues. It probably says something really depressing about my personal life that actually I didn't have anything better to do. So that afternoon I was doing exactly that, wandering around the streets of Soho, making a note of all the performers listed as playing that night. As expected, none of them listed Grifter's Bone as playing, but I made a note of them anyway. It wasn't that late, but it was already dark, the world illuminated by the colourful glow of the Soho signs and shop fronts. The wind was slow in the narrow streets, but still cut through my thin woolen coat as I wandered, looking for a small, cruel-looking man in a ragged brown suit. I'd kept my watch maybe an hour when I saw someone staring at me from the doorway of a small shop. The sign above didn't have an obvious name, simply reading crystals, books, tarot. He was tall, black and careworn, deep lines of worry etched into an otherwise handsome face. When he saw me looking at him, he began to walk up to me, still with that intense look. I took a couple of steps back and asked if I could help him. He shook his head as if unsure what to say, then asked me what I was listening to. A chill ran over me as I realized he was staring at my ears. I said I wasn't listening to anything as I wasn't wearing headphones and asked him what he wanted. He shook his head again and mumbled something about protecting my hearing. He turned away then and started walking back into the shop.
Jesus.
I was about to follow him when I saw a small group of people turning the corner. Their features were hard to be sure of in the dark, but walking at the front, dragging a rolling keyboard case, was a short, thin man in an oversized brown suit.
Oh dear.
The three figures behind him were all much taller than him, but each was stick-thin and moved with a jerkiness to their motions. I looked back to where the strange, staring man had been, but he had retreated inside his shop, and the lights were now off. So I began to follow the man I thought to be Alfred Grifter, as he and his companions moved down the street. The others all carried instrument cases as well, and no one else on the street seemed to pay them any notice at all. Not even when the tallest physically shoved a man out of his path. Finally, they turned down a flight of stairs into a basement jazz bar I didn't recognize. After a few seconds, I followed them. The bar was dimly lit and quiet, with red and orange lights giving it a warm, smoky feel. Patrons stood around drinking and chatting. I counted 11 in total. I remember I made a note of the number because of how empty the place was. Most seemed to be dressed for an evening of jazz, but I noticed a few of them seemed to be wearing thick coats or jackets.
Oh, God.
One, an older white man with a shock of silver hair, appeared to be wearing a silk bathrobe.
What?
Behind them, on the stage, Grifter's Bone were setting up their instruments. Now, despite everything that happened thus far appearing to show the contrary, I am not an idiot. I remembered Lee's story very clearly indeed and had no intention of staying for the show. Instead, I took out my phone, set it recording video, and placed it in a small alcove near the entrance with a good view of the stage. I checked to make sure the microphone was working, and then I left. I stood at the top of the stairs into that dingy jazz club, and I waited. After a few minutes of shivering in the cold, I thought I had made a mistake. The streets were deserted, and the previously mild November night had taken on a bone-deep chill.
A bone-deep chill,
eh? Muffled through the walls, but still rising distinctly to where I stood, a note. A single, clear note from what sounded like a cello. It was joined by others, a keyboard, a guitar, and over them all the pure, piping sound of a flute. It was beautiful. It was some of the most achingly beautiful music I had ever heard. Then the screams began. There was no build-up to the screams, no lead-up to explain the sudden eruption of sounds of agony. There were crashes as well, noises of impact, and once or twice something that sounded like tearing. Through it all in the background played that beautiful music. I stood there, frozen in place, not wanting to go down there, but not feeling able to flee. As below, all I could hear was haunting music and butchery. I went to pull out my mobile to phone the police, but I realized I'd left it down there recording in the jazz club. I finally made the decision to run for help when the noises ceased abruptly, and there was silence. I looked around for anyone who might have heard the cries of pain and panic and be coming to help, but there was no one. Just me. I began to slowly, carefully make my way down towards the basement. If whoever was down there wanted to kill me, I would be easy enough to find with the information on my phone. One way or another, I was at their mercy. When I opened the door, it was hard to know exactly what I was looking at. In the dull red light, the torn and mangled remains of the people I had seen alive not half an hour ago were almost indistinguishable from the carpet and furnishings.
Grace.
On stage, the musicians calmly packed away their instruments. They did not have a spot of blood on them. The one in the brown suit, who I assumed to be Alfred Grifter, looked up. He gazed straight into my eyes and said, "Encore?" I grabbed my phone and ran. I didn't phone the police. I was too scared of what might happen. I watched the news obsessively, waiting to see anything on the massacre, but there was nothing. It's been almost a week now, and I've heard nothing.
That's crazy.
I haven't been able to access the footage from that night. My phone says it's incorrectly formatted somehow. But I'll keep trying. I did go back to the jazz club, but I can find no sign of violence, no sign of Grifter's Bone, and no sign of the 11 people who died that night. Statement ends. Our own investigations into the band Grifter's Bone yielded little that Ms. Ling did not include in her own remarkably comprehensive article, Spooks and Solos, The Slim Pickings of Grifter's Bone. Certainly her statement appears to be easily the most detailed account of any encounter with the band, assuming it is to be trusted. The Dean Street Jazz Club strenuously denies any violence took place on its premises during the dates in question, and there are no police reports that seem to match up with Ms. Ling's description. Well, I suppose that's not quite true. According to police reports, in the month of October 2013, There were a total of 11 deaths by violence in the Greater London area. It's impossible to match the details of all of them based on the information in Ms. Ling's statement, but one of the victims, Mr. Albert Sands, 67 years old and beaten to death in his own home. Although it happened 2 weeks before the events of this statement, according to the police, he was wearing a silk dressing gown when he was brutally murdered. We are unfortunately unable to follow up with Ms. Ling. It seems roughly 2 weeks after giving this statement, she assaulted Agatha Norrell, her elderly neighbour, with a claw hammer. Ms. Norrell was left in a coma from which she did not recover, while Ms. Ling turned the hammer upon herself. By the time the police arrived, she had done so much damage to her head that there was no hope of saving her.
Jesus.
I have an uncomfortable feeling she might have finally gotten that video to work. End recording. Supplement. I've been watching Martin. He's been very attentive to my needs and recovery since I returned to work, almost to the exclusion of his own tasks.
Oh, Martin.
Previously, I might have ascribed such ministrations to his own lax work ethic, but in the stress of Prentice's attack, I am sure I glanced moments of competence or even cunning that are beyond what his previous work would indicate.
Oh, God.
Is he playing the fool? Purposefully failing in his tasks to delay or hinder my investigation? It's possible. He has also shown remarkable interest in my own theories as to who killed Gertrude. I have thus far diverted him by saying I believe it to be whatever is lurking in the tunnels below, but he seems unsatisfied by that response. I'm glad he's moved out of the archives, as it gives me a chance to work here without his constant presence. Also because he managed to leave some of his possessions behind. For the most part, it's just a few books of relatively awful poetry. There are a few pieces I feel could almost have been affecting if his style wasn't so obviously enamored with Keats. But there is an unfinished letter addressed to his mother in Devon, in which he mentions that he is worried about the others finding out I've been lying. It may be nothing, some inconsequential deception or other. After all, it is ostensibly written to his mother. But if it was actually to be sent to someone else, I will keep my eye on Martin.
Oh, God.
End supplement.
Jesus Christ. The supplements are killing me, man. They're so funny because it's just like, just a little snippet of his descent into madness. And then he was like, Martin's been taking really good care of me. Suspicious. Tell me you weren't cared for much as a child without telling me you weren't cared for much as a child, Jonathan Sins. Anyway, we're going to listen to another one because it's only like 20 minutes long. And I really like listening to it, so, you know.
Rusty Quill presents the Magnus Archives.
Excuse me. Still got mango hair in my teeth.
Episode 43, Section 31.
I really shouldn't be talking about it on tape.
That's entirely up to you. You came to us.
Yeah. Just want to talk about it with someone, you know?
Very much so.
I'm breaking the law by talking to you. You understand that?
I think so. There's some sort of non-disclosure agreement, I believe.
Pretty much. Do you need my real name?
Technically, no, but from what I understand of your situation, you'd be rather identifiable even without it. This is not the first time we've had statements from witnesses in sensitive positions. I'll mark the tape and file it for internal use only, which means it comes under the Institute's own very strict NDA policy and cannot be referenced or requested by external agencies or authorities, such as the police.
That's the best you can offer.
I'm afraid so. Though I remind you again, you are under no obligation to make a statement if it makes you uncomfortable. Or if you're worried about your voice being recognized, you could always write it down. I'll make an audio copy later.
I'm not really big on writing. I'm more of a talker.
Odd choice of career then. I hear there are lots of forms to fill in.
Not much since I became Section 31.
Yes, you mentioned this Section 30. You know what, we will cover it in the statement. Statement of Police Constable Basira Hussain regarding her time investigating strange occurrences as part of Section 31. Statement taken directly from subject, September 19th, 2016. Statement begins.
Now,
Yes.
right, well, first off, I'm not part of Section 31. It's not like a unit or a division within the police force or anything like that. It's a form you have to sign. Section 31 of the Freedom of Information Act covers exclusions for information pertaining to law enforcement. It just means that any information that could interfere with the prevention or detection of a crime can't be given out as part of an FOI request. So what happens is, when you stumble across something a bit weird, then after it's over, you're taken to one side and told to sign a form officially declaring what you saw and experienced was directly related to a crime. Then it's covered by Section 31 and can't be revealed under the Freedom of Information Act. There's a whole bunch of other NDA stuff in there as well, but it basically means you have to keep quiet about it. The thing is, signing your first Section 31 really marks you out. Word spreads fast in the station, and once they see you've signed one, people start to push you in that direction. They call you sectioned, which I guess is kind of appropriate. You're generally assigned to head out with others who signed, and if any officers get a whiff of something weird from a scene, they'll wait till you arrive, rather than going in themselves and risk getting sectioned themselves. I
That's so
suppose in
weird.
some ways it's kind of a unit, but not one with any funding or training or official power. Just a bunch of burned out cops with a retirement rate 5 times the average. That's why it took so long to get a car here when your friend found Miss Robinson's body. I was on a burglary call out with Carver, the only other sectioned officer on shift, and you can bet no one else was responding to a call from the Magnus Institute. No offense.
None taken. And full names, please.
What? Oh, PC Richard Carver.
Thank you. I did notice you seemed less taken aback by the large number of shriveled silver worm corpses than I would have expected.
Yeah, I mean, that was easily one of the most disgusting things I've seen on the job, but not the weirdest.
Shall we start at the beginning then?
Okay, well, the first time I got hit with a Section 31 was 5 years ago, August 2011. I'd got my badge the year before that and was still getting used to some of the more stressful bits of the job. The week before this happened, I'd heard an officer got his leg shattered by some arsehole with a cricket bat. We were speeding towards the scene, but couldn't do anything but listen to it over the radio. That sort of thing, it does something to your brain. That mix of adrenaline and helplessness. So I was still a bit rattled when the call came in. There was a fire out near Clapham. A residential home had gone up and the fire brigade were calling for some police backup. Apparently the homeowner was getting violent and there were suspicions of arson. I was riding with John Spencer back then. We didn't really get on. Let's just say I wasn't a fan of the tone he always used when he said the word diversity. Though I never had enough to bring any real grievance about it. Even so, he didn't deserve what happened to him. So we arrive at the smoking room of the house, and the firefighters have got it pretty much locked down. Just a lot of smoke and damp rubble, except for where we see a couple of firefighters struggling to keep a guy restrained. He was a Hispanic male, probably mid to late 40s, heavy set with a completely shaved head. Another of the firefighters, this one with a fresh black eye, comes over to brief us. Apparently the guy had burst out of the house shortly after they arrived, not a single burn mark on him. The fire brigade had approached to see what help he needed, but instead he just started throwing punches and trying to run. That was an assault charge, sure, but why the arson? The fireman just sort of nods to him, and I realized for the first time the bald guy's saying something. Not loud, but intensely. I mean, this was years ago, so I don't remember exactly what he was saying, but it definitely involved words cleansing fire, all shall be ash, and the name Asag, which I later learned is some kind of Sumerian demon. So that's fun. I reckon suspicion of arson was probably about right, and Spencer agreed. So he went to arrest the guy, maybe calm him down some while I got the handcuffs on. There's still part of me that feels guilty it was that way around. As I was cuffing him, there was this sudden, intense pain in my hand. It was just as I touched the metal to close them, it was incredibly hot. I once took a welding class ages back, just kind of on a whim, and made the mistake of forgetting that just because metal isn't glowing red doesn't mean it isn't scorching hot. It was that same burn, too intense for your mind to process for a second. Then all your nerves fire at once. It hurt, is what I'm saying. If I hadn't managed to get the cuffs closed before the pain really hit, I don't know what would have happened. As it was, I ended up with some badly blistered fingers, while in front of me the guy leaned over to Spencer and whispered something right in his ear. I didn't hear what he said, but Spencer went completely pale. He was shaking slightly as we shoved the guy in the back of the car, and
That's
I had
weird.
to drive us back to the station. He refused to tell me what the guy had said. Our arsonist's name was Diego Molina. He was assistant curator at some Mexican museum come over with a loan to the Natural History Museum. But they hadn't heard from him for a few weeks. He didn't say much in questioning, though his English was clearly fine. Unfortunately, the arson case collapsed pretty quickly, so we just had to slap him with assault and let him walk with a hefty fine. Spencer didn't exactly help matters by getting himself suspended. The only thing Diego Molina had on him when we brought him in was a small book bound in red leather. They caught Spencer in storage trying to destroy it with a Zippo lighter. I never saw him again. They told me he killed himself when he got home. Apparently he'd somehow filled the bath full of boiling water and just got in. Official story was he'd somehow done it using a kettle, which that's just about the weakest cover-up I've ever heard. Anyway, after that happened, and I'd explained my burned fingers, they gave me my very first Section 31.
I see. I see. How many potentially paranormal events do you generally investigate as a police officer?
None. No one says the P word. Not paranormal, not supernatural, not even spooky. The words you learn to look out for are weird, odd, strange. And if you hear the phrase, "I'm not quite sure what I'm looking at," then yeah, you're not getting much backup. Almost all of them are false alarms. We get called to a lot of bad drug trips, animal attacks, and folks with genuine mental health issues. Those are the ones that have the potential to sound weirdish during initial contact. I didn't get another genuine Section 31 case for almost 3 years. July 18th, 2014. I remember because it was the hottest day of the year and the aircon in the car was out, so we were really suffering. It was me and Alice Tonner, who everyone calls her Daisy, but I can never get her to tell me why. Anyway, Daisy was sectioned years before I was even on the force. She's never been that forthcoming about any of her own experience, takes Section 31 very seriously. The most I could get out of her was that she was originally sectioned for something she referred to as spider husks. The way she described it, it sounded like she found a bunch of shells, the sort crabs leave behind when they grow, but I could never figure out if it was meant to be the husks of people-sized spiders or the spider-like husks of people, and Daisy never seemed like she wanted to clarify. I'm sure she mentioned vampires once as well, but I think she was joking. Probably. Maybe. Anyway, we were headed towards Kensington. This one had originally been called in for the ambulance, but then neighbours had reported gunshots, and we had a very strange call with the paramedics. They had specifically refused to confirm there was a gun on the scene, so we didn't send an armed unit. They were still on standby, but something in the paramedics report made the other responders decide they should wait for us to get there. The building was pretty run down for Kensington. Still nicer than my house, but, you know. The paramedics met us at the door and showed us up. The lift was out, so we headed up the stairs. On each floor, I saw faces peering out of the cracks in front doors. They must have been the neighbours who heard gunshots. We carried on up until we reached the door that was already open. The lights inside were off. Paramedics said they've all been smashed. The windows had all been painted over, and it was like a boiler room in there. But even in the gloom, it was clear there was a lot of blood around. A lot of blood. We found the victim in the living room, sat on a large armchair. His face was a mess. We got a torch on him, and it was clear he'd been shot in the head multiple times at close range. He was male, white, youngish. Age was hard to guess from what was left of his face. His clothes were new, and there were a lot of expensive-looking trinkets about the place. A lot of old-looking domino sets in glass cases. Daisy spotted the gun lying next to him and went over to retrieve it while I checked the place for any other signs of life. I just turned around when I heard Daisy scream. The guy was moving, trying to gurgle something through what was left of his jaw. He was reaching for the gun. Daisy leapt for it, but it was right next to him and she missed. The man, who he should have been a corpse already, raised the gun and pointed it into this mass of flesh that was his head. Daisy grabbed the gun before he could pull the trigger again and managed to wrestle the gun away from him. Then he made a noise, just a really horrible sound. I think he was trying to cry. The paramedics took him after that. They didn't really want to, but it was clearly more in their domain than ours. I assume hospitals probably have their own version of a Section 31 those poor idiots had to sign later. Daisy and I told them we'd clear it up on the police side. Just a standard suicide, and the body was taken by the ambulance. It cut down on the forms, and neither of us wanted to sign another goddamn Section 31.
Fascinating. What other cases have fallen under this classification?
Officially, I've only had one other, and that was yours.
Officially?
You get a few dozen calls a year from people who have strange experiences, but they don't have any evidence. I mean, if what they say is true, then it would be a Section 31, but there's nothing that can be investigated or proven, so there's nothing to report. I always feel bad for them. They're always so sincere, so sure you can help, but unless they can point to the ghost or the spooky clown doll or whatever, there's not...
Spooky clown doll?
I've also been quite lucky, to be honest. I've dodged quite a few of the nastier Section 31s over the years. I remember Harry used to get wasted and tell all sorts of grim stories.
Full names, please.
Sorry. Sergeant Harry Altman. Worked with him a few years back before he retired.
Right. So, just to return to Gertrude's body, that's currently considered a weird case.
I mean, we're investigating it as a murder because that's what it is. But you guys are basically an automatic Section 31, so I've got almost no help on it. Maybe that's why I wanted to make a statement, you know? I can't talk to anybody about this stuff, and then I come here and you've got all these people's experiences listened to and filed away. I don't know. I've been meaning to come in ever since that call out.
Yes. So no one is helping you with Gertrude's case? No oversight?
Not really. I tried making the argument that the murder didn't seem to connect to any of your paranormal business, at least not directly, but nope. I've got a shot corpse, 3 boxes of cassettes, and Daisy, who's CID now, which I suppose means it's technically her problem, but she's now the only detective who's already sectioned, so she's always way too busy. As far as I know, neither of us have even had a chance to actually start listening to the tapes.
Interesting. Obviously, further investigation of the police cases to which Ms. Hussein refers is out of the question. Ensuring that the breach of non-disclosure and spreading of confidential information remains hidden is our top priority in this instance. Further investigation, however subtle, could put that in significant danger. Beyond that, Ms. Hussein did not appear to expect any such investigation. I can't say I blame her. Much as I value the deductive powers of my team, they are not trained detectives with the force of the Metropolitan Police behind them, so I imagine there would be little more they could unearth.
Anyone
Certainly
notice how we
nothing
suddenly
worth
turned
risk.
off the recorder?
If nothing else, it appears we now have a name for our mystery burn victim from case 0121102, Diego Molina. And I have a suspicion I know where he got that book. It's a shame he's dead, of course, but a piece of the puzzle is not something to be ignored. End recording. Supplemental. I have convinced Basira to give me access to the tapes. It won't be many or often, as they are currently police evidence and thus hard to subtly remove. She can't necessarily guarantee the ones I get will be the most pertinent to the case, but it is still a significant victory. I only ever spoke to Gertrude once or twice during her time as archivist. I was very new. I I don't remember what her voice sounded like. Part of me worries about what I might find on these tapes, but a bigger part of me worries I will find nothing. This uncertainty is wearing on me.
I bet it is, babes.
And I don't know how much more I can take.
Oh.
And supplemental.
Oh, buddy. Ah, shit, come on.
The Magnus Archives is a podcast distributed by rustyquill.com and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 international license. Today's episode was written and performed by Jonathan Sims. Produced by our...
I like that he like turned it off to be like, hey, I'll help you. I want to help. Can I help? I really want to listen to... Oh, God. Something has happened. There we go. I really want to listen to another one. I know that's naughty, but I really do. I really want to listen to another one. I will listen to one more, and I won't let myself go to bed until I have written 250 words at least. That's the compromise I'm going to make with myself, because I'm really liking this season 2 so far. It's really good. I really like it. I like this. I like the whole idea of like, I mean, obviously it's because Jonathan is low-key losing his mind and is accusing all of his crewmen, of his co-workers of literal murder for some, like, I don't know what they've done to deserve that, but you know, clearly they've done fucking something. And yeah, you know what I mean. It's just, ooh, you know. Let me go get my Coke though. I need to clean up my Coke cans. I have so many Coke cans around. It's starting to become embarrassing. I still got mango hair in my teeth as well, which is frustrating. Yeah. Okay. One more, and then it's like an even 4, you know. I'm so naughty. It's fine. This one is called Tightroper.
Episode 44. Tightrope.
Still the same dramatic fucking intro.
Case 9790302.
Oh my god! Gertrude! Hi! What the fuck? That is crazy. Oh my god, hi Gertrude! I was really expecting like a different voice for some reason. I was expecting like a really old woman.
Yuri Utkin. Incident occurred in the village of Albasovo, Central Russia, November 1952. Statement given 2nd of March 1979.
Committed to tape, 15th of April, 1997. Gertrude Robinson recorded.
I like that they have different ways of describing it.
As a child,
Like she had the whole committed to tape thing, whereas you know, Jonathan's got his whole recording by head archivist. I'm kind of upset that she doesn't say head archivist. But I think that also makes it even funnier that Jonathan does. Like, he's very adamant that everybody know that he is head archivist. It's very important to him. Gertrude did not give a single shit. She was like, this when the recording happened, I'm Gertrude. Hello, hi. Come listen to the story, I guess. Good. And Jonathan's like, I am the head archivist. I know I'm losing my mind, but I'm the head fucking archivist, okay? My name is Jonathan Sims. Head archivist. Hilarious.
I always loved the circus.
Okay.
I grew up in the little village of Algasovo, deep in the forest steppes.
Okay.
We were tiny, far below the notice of the district's Resovet, and as such we were quite a poor community, with little hope of being added to the circus routes as anything but a way station. Every year he would take my brother Ivan and me, and we would make the journey down to Moshansk to see the circus as soon as it arrived. Jugglers, acrobats, wild animals. It took my breath away every time. My favourites were the clowns. Not as you would think of them. I've seen what you call clowns in this country, but back then clowns would actually tell jokes, not simply hit each other and fall over. I didn't always understand the jokes they told, but there was something intoxicating about sitting there, surrounded by people all laughing and cheering. Even if I didn't always share their amusement, I always shared in their joy. I never liked the acrobats, though. I would watch them swinging from the top of the tents, leaping between the trapeze or walking their tightropes, and my chest would tighten, and all I could see in my mind would be the image of them falling to the sand-covered floor.
I'm assuming fear of falling plays in
I've never been afraid
this.
of heights myself, you understand. I used to spend half my summers at the top of the tallest trees I could find.
You're afraid of falling.
When I was 6, my best friend Piotr fell when we were climbing together. He survived, but broke his leg so badly that he still walks with a limp today. From that moment, that long, terrible moment when I watched him fall, whenever I would watch the acrobats fly through the air, it was all I could do not to close my eyes. Still, that doesn't change the fact that my visit to the circus in Moshansk remains some of the happiest memories I have of my childhood.
No.
One day in early November, the circus came to Algasovo. To say this was strange is to put it very mildly. As I've said, we were a small village and far below the notice of the troops that travelled the region. More than that, winter was beginning to set in, and it should have been many months before the touring season began again. Then, as now, all circuses were owned and run by the government, something that is taken very seriously. So the idea that it might be an independent company that had simply found itself in Algasovo was unthinkable. There were always rumours of vagrants or travellers who had set up their own shows, but these would be small things, always half ready to move on if someone reported them to the local Selsovet. This circus was huge, easily as big as the ones I would see at Moshansk. The trucks rolled through the village shortly before dawn, and by the evening, there it stood in the field to the east of town. Over the entrance stood a brightly painted wooden sign that read, Roigod Cirque, another circus. I begged my father to go. He was weary, but it became clear that almost everyone in the village was planning to visit, even if only so they knew what to report to the Selsovet later.
To the what?
Soon a mob of us were heading through the icy November evening towards the colourful tents and bright lights. As we approached, I heard a shrill piping sound. I'd never before heard a steam organ.
Oh,
in the
shit!
other circuses I'd visited, and I found the noise invigorating. There was something in its shriek that thrilled me. though it was the last time I would be able to hear such a sound without being filled with the deepest dread. There was no fence around the outside, but instead the gate stood alone before the circus, with the name illuminated by gaslights either side. It was not a surprise that such a place would not have electricity like the ones in Moshansk, but still it seemed as though the flickering shadows cast by those lamps were starker than I was used to. Next to the gate stood a short woman in a leotard, seemingly oblivious to the cold. As the group of us approached, she began to wave with a slow, languid motion and called over for us to come in. The circus was open, she said, and all were welcome. Her voice was strange. The Russian she spoke was perfect, but her accent, her intonation were all wrong. Each time she spoke, it was abrupt and repetitive, like a scratched record. If my father and his friends noticed, they didn't show any sign of it, though they were suspicious enough already. I didn't care. I was too excited about the circus. Ivan was even keener than I was, and upon hearing this invitation, he burst out of the crowd and ran eagerly through the gate. And then it was as though some spell were broken, and the wariness seemed to disappear all at once. My father took my hand and led me through under that bright sign, paying the 5 rubles for entry. Beyond it, there were more gaslights, casting their pallid glow on tents and wagons. That whistling steam organ still played, giving the place a feeling of life and energy, while the air was full of sweet smells. From behind the tent came the roar of a big cat, and I let go of my father's hand as I ran ahead to see. Sure enough, there, sat behind thick iron bars, was the vivid orange face of a tiger. It regarded me with narrowed eyes, though it remained still. I was entranced. Its fur was shiny and thick, and its mouth curled open to reveal long teeth of brilliant white. I'd seen bears and lions before, and once even an elephant, but I'd never seen a real-life tiger before. I leant closer, until all that was between us was 6 inches and some rusty iron bars. As I stared at this beautiful creature in front of me, it moved its head. It was the strangest thing to watch. It seemed to shift its position slowly, like a doll having its joints twisted, but its face remained completely still. The mouth stayed curled to reveal its teeth. The ears stayed alert and pointed forward, and the eyes still stared out, though where they had at first seemed brilliant, they now had an almost glassy look to them.
That's a fucking dead That's a dead tiger.
It roared, the same powerful cry of violence that I had heard before, but as it did so, I fell back in surprise. The tiger's mouth had not moved. As I scrambled back, I felt a large hand on my shoulder and looked up to see 2 huge men in overalls. They lifted me easily, so my feet hung almost 2 feet from the ground. They talked fast, crude Russian, and their words seemed to shift back and forth between them, telling me that behind the tent was off limits and that I should leave the tiger alone, as it wasn't ready to perform yet. At least that's what I thought they'd said at the time. It was only later that it struck me their exact phrase had been that the tiger wasn't finished. They carried me back to my father and placed me down next to him. He thanked them and asked me if I'd seen my brother.
What?
Ivan had not returned after he ran off through the gate.
Oh, your brother's dead. Sorry to tell you, mate, but he's fucking dead.
To a pale man in a flamboyant red coat, whom I took to be the ringmaster. This brightly dressed man said there was no reason to be alarmed, that he would ask his people to be on the lookout, and that Ivan would no doubt return when the show was about to start. There was much to explore in the circus, he told my father patiently, and children often let their excitement get the better of them in this strange new place, but they'd never lost one yet. This last part he said with a smile that I think was supposed to be reassuring, but reminded me too much of the tiger with its shiny, unmoving teeth.
Everyone here is dead.
I left them arguing there and went off.
They're all fucking dead. No chance.
In my 10-year-old's mind, I was sure that I would be able to figure out where my younger brother had wandered to. I would return triumphant, and my father would tell all the village of how well I had done. As I walked, I became fascinated by the flickering gaslights, some clear and bright, others behind coloured glass, and decided that Ivan would also have been drawn to them. So I followed them round the tent.
That's
through the
very
wagons and
very
trucks,
logical.
until I found myself standing before a smaller tent, set off to the side of the big top.
Your brother's in there, he's fucking dead.
There was another wooden sign across the top. This one appeared to be written in English. I did not then understand what it said. Knowing what I know now, I believe it said freak show. Now, you must understand that the freak show was not part of a Soviet circus. Indeed, I believe even in America, the practice has been out of fashion for many, many years. So I did not have any idea what to expect when I went in looking for Ivan. What I saw inside is one of the main reasons that I'm so sure that my experience deserves to be in your library.
Mm.
It's the reason I went to Moscow to study medicine. For the people, if such they can be called, that I saw in there were of such grotesque proportion and bodily forms that I became obsessed with learning how it was they might still live. It was only when I was many years into my medical training that I finally accepted that scientifically such things were not possible. The mouth cannot function if it's located anywhere other than the face. Limbs cannot bend like rubber. A man cannot walk and talk and stare without a head. You will, I hope, forgive my lack of precise descriptions. It has been 27 years since that night, and I can no longer clearly distinguish between what is memory and what is nightmare.
Oof.
I walked along the row of cages.
Cages?
Those few other patrons who had found their way to this tent turned around quickly, leaving with pale faces and shaking legs. But
Don't
I was
fucking blame them.
determined to find Ivan.
Ivan's now part of
I
the
closed
freak
my
show,
eyes as
mate.
I walked, opening them only momentarily every few steps to check if he was there. I called out, but there was no reply, either from my brother or from the silent things in their cages. Finally, I reached the end of the tent. The last cage was empty, save for a large Hessian sack. It was tied by thick rope, wrapped around so tightly that it bulged through the gaps in its binding. I took momentary comfort in the fact that it was far too big to be Ivan. Still, I found myself approaching it, curiosity momentarily overcoming my growing sense of dread.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
Then, in the distance, the steam organ began to play, announcing the start of the show. And the bag began to move.
Oh god.
It contorted itself, pulsing and throbbing like a wounded animal's stomach, and fell heavily forward. I screamed and fled out into the frozen night. It was only when I was about to pass back out through the wooden gates that I stopped, remembering that even if Ivan had fled like me, my father was still in this terrible place. I resolved to rescue him and turned back towards the
That's
main
so
tent.
cute. I love children. They're so
Light
funny.
spilled out at the open entrance as the steam organ kept playing. I entered to see two clowns fighting. Not the slapstick routines of the clowns I'd been used to, rife with wordplay and satire, but a crunching violence I had never seen before.
Oh god.
One of them, huge and scowling in white and purple polka dots, pinned down its smaller companion, whose bright yellow shirt was now streaked with red.
That's gross.
With each blow from the big clown, the crowd, among whom I could clearly see my father, howled with laughter and cheers. The laughter didn't sound right. None of it was right. It was as though I was looking at a tent full of vicious strangers, every one of whom wore a face I had known since birth.
That's so horrid.
Then my gaze drifted upwards, to the tightrope stretched between the towering tent poles, and my heart stopped. Halfway across, tottering on legs too short to balance properly, was Ivan.
Oh god.
Everything else was forgotten as I watched him there, and the sounds of the world around me faded away. The question of how he had got up there, or made it halfway along that thin metal wire, didn't even enter my mind. I could think of nothing but that next step that would send him tumbling to a floor caked in sand, grease paint, and blood. No one else in the audience or the ring seemed to have noticed him up there, and my throat had closed too tight to call to them. I could do nothing but watch as Ivan took another step along the tightrope. He swayed to one side, then the other, and I could see he was crying, tears falling to the floor like single drops of rain. He took another step, and then another. He did not fall. I watched in amazement as my 7-year-old brother walked and walked. My heart was still clenched in fear, and I could not breathe. Ivan took his final step, lifted his right foot, and placed it upon the platform on the opposite tent pole. He had made it. He gripped the pole and moved around it and out of sight. I do not know how long I had stood there watching, but it seemed like only a moment later I felt my father's hand grip me by the shoulder. I turned to see him standing there with Ivan by his side. He had a look on his face as though he had eaten something that had spoiled, and without a word he led us out of the circus and back to our home. The field was empty by the next morning. No one in our village ever spoke of that night, and when the state circus came to Morshansk the next year, my father did not offer to take us, and we did not ask.
I'm not bloody
For many
surprised.
years, I thought it might have been some strange dream or distorted memory, as no one ever acknowledged that it had happened. But I asked Ivan about it when we were older. He hesitantly said that he remembered the circus coming, but everything after running through the gate was a blur. I pressed him further on the subject, and he just shook his head. He didn't remember what happened, he said, but he still got terrible nightmares. Every November, around when the circus had come to Algasovo, he would dream that he was there again. He could smell the sawdust and hear the steam organ playing, but he could not move. In the dream, he would find himself tightly bound with coarse rope and trapped inside a thick Hessian sack. I remembered those nights. He always woke up screaming. Final comments. Sounds, from what I can tell, like Yuri Utkin and his brother were rather lucky in their encounter with the circus, as both escaped with only significant mental trauma. A decidedly tame result for a run-in with Gregor Orsinov's troupe, especially as this would have been during the height of their tour. If it was in the 70s after Denikin had left, then maybe it would come as less of a surprise, but as it stands, I think it's somewhat amazing that the whole town appears to have made it through in one piece. Obviously, it's a good thing the children survived, but it does pique my interest in Ivan Utkin. Unfortunately, he appears to have passed away in 1984, but he must have been something rather special.
Supplemental. This is the first of the tapes I've received from Becerra. Luckily, it appears that Gertrude was not as lax in properly marking these tapes as she has been the rest of the archive. While it provides some interesting context for Leanne Denikin's statement and this strange circus, I will admit to some disappointment it doesn't address any of my more pressing questions about Gertrude's tapes. Why did she begin recording them? And why stop? If she'd been doing so right up until her death, she would have likely gotten through much of the archive, and moreover, I wouldn't have had to find this tape player tucked away in the storage room, covered in dust and cobwebs. Moreover, she clearly knows a lot more about what is going on than I had previously assumed. This is far from the first time she has encountered the other circus, or the circus of the other, or however it translates. I suppose I'll have to return the tape to Becerra and wait until she can get me another one. It is infuriating to have to simply wait like this, but there is little else I can do.
That's true, Jonathan.
Additionally, I think someone may have found these secret tapes. They do not appear to have been disturbed, but the drawer in which I kept them is slightly more open than I left it. I have not mentioned it to the others, as if any of them did open my drawer for innocent reasons, then I don't want to let them know there is anything significant about the tapes inside.
He's
I've
actually
done one of the
losing it.
floorboards and will be hiding them beneath there from now on. End supplement.
Jonathan is actually insane. He's like actually insane now. Oh, the poor bastard. Yeah, he's fully lost it. He's That's crazy. It was so weird to hear it in someone else's, like, I know obviously you hear other people giving their thing, but it's different. It's just different, man. Because I know we're gonna hear more of her. Creepy. She does seem to know more about what's going on. How much did she know? And where are her notes? That's what I want to know. I want to know where her notes are. Because either she put them on the recordings, in which case, you know, listening to the recordings will bring Jonathan up to scratch, I think is the phrase. Or up to date. I don't know. Either way, it will, or she wrote them down somewhere, you know, like in a notebook or something, like I do. But obviously better than my notebook. Oh, I can add another link though. Episode, what episode? What episode was the accordion or the kaleidoscope? Calliope. Episode 24. Whistling Calliope. And Weird Circus. Episode 44. There we go. Got another link. I've only got 3 links so far. I've probably missed some. Or at least I haven't written them down. What I'm still curious about is, one, why her body was downstairs, like in the base, in the tunnels, but also why was Gertrude's hair and pictures in that weird culty thing in the forest? That seems really odd to me. I don't know, but seems odd. My ear is making noises again. I need to clean it. Right, I guess I should probably do some work. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go have a shower, freshen up the bod, the mind, if you will, and then come back and actually get something done. Even if it's the tiniest thing, like something, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be a lot. It just has to be something. It just has to feel like I'm making progress, you know? Because otherwise it's like, fuck, you know? It's just, oh. I will probably have to end up extending this because it's due on Friday, and I do not feel like I can get that much done that quickly. If that happens, I may have to extend the critical vignette, which is obviously not good either, because then that doesn't give me the full 2 weeks to prepare for my presentation. I need to get my act together. And I think, unfortunately, part of that will have to be slowing down with these streams, which won't be a problem for you because you're already catching up. So, you know, it's not like you're going to lack content unless you really decide to splurge. But, you know, still, I just like listening to this. I feel very bad for Jonathan because I can genuinely see his sanity crumbling apart. My drawer was slightly more open. That's the kind of bullshit I would pull. Be like, I know you've been in my drawer because it was slightly open. It was more open than it was. But to be also fair, those are the kind of details that when I was, you know, living with my siblings and I would steal their shit because that's what siblings do. That was the kind of shit I always got just right. Putting things back exactly how they're meant to be, making sure the drawer was closed exactly the same amount. I knew where the details lied. The important details, the ones that you don't even think about, but like you still notice. It's that uncanny thing, you know? You just notice when something's wrong, even if you don't actually notice it. And then you put words to it and you're like, oh, yes, that's the problem. So, this has been almost 2 hours long. I'm so naughty. Anyway, I'm going to go do those things that I said I was going to do. And I probably will not see you again today. So maybe I will see you tomorrow. But I do need to try, and I've got a meeting tomorrow. So, and I also need to, just make progress because otherwise I'll be so embarrassed when I talk to him tomorrow. Anyway, that's enough from me. Goodbye.